and this is a presentation on mentor texts and the interdisciplinary benefits of using them to teach. First, I want to give a quick preview over the content of this presentation. First are my specific goals in the English classroom concerning mentor texts, what the process is about, and general information, data that I have used to guide my practice and implementation, an action plan based on that data, roles of the stakeholders and time frame for them to complete those roles, and some of the outcomes and benefits of using mentor texts at several different content areas. First, the reading goals in my own English classroom were four. One, a clear purpose for reading and curiosity about the topics. Second, I wanted tools and routines that allowed focus on meaning, relevance, and author's craft in the text. Third, I wanted to engage in fruitful discussion about the effectiveness of a move for a given purpose audience. And finally, I wanted to provide projects and opportunities that encourage collaborative problem solving with peers and teachers. So some general information about the mentor text process. It was developed by Marchetti and Odell in 2021, and it has 5 steps in which students can analyze the text. The first step is to notice something that the writer does. The student would then cite a specific line or page number. It can be a move at the word, sentence, paragraph, or whole text level. Second, they would make a theory about what that move is doing to analyze the impact of that move on the story and on the reader. Third is naming the move, and this is where the mentor text structure kind of diverges from some of the traditional English teachings. So for example, students who found at a sentence level a parenthetical clause have the freedom to name it something like a basket comma. So they would use the effect established in step 2 to come up with a relevant and memorable name. So in that very same example of basket comma, a parenthetical phrase can be taken out of a sentence, and the sentence will still make sense and it'll still have meaning, but the parenthetical clause or the basket clause adds additional information and additional imagery to that sentence. Fourth, they'll make connections to other texts and within that same text. So does the writer continue to make that move, and what other texts or writers have used this move before? That's where we get into kind of that genre study and author bio study that is also within the mentor text framework. 5, mimic the move. How do you as a writer and a student plan to incorporate this very same move in your own writing? Just a note about this process is that these steps do not have to be completed every single time a student encounters a new text, nor do they have to happen in that order. So an anecdote for my own class is that I have started before, after implementing the process, I have started at the make the connections to other texts. So I've shown them 2 different examples of lyrics from different songs. They made the connections first, and then they went back to naming the move and making a theory. So before implementing this mentor text process in depth, I was encouraged to come up with a priority pie about how much time I would be spending in my classroom focusing on different tasks. I thought that I would spend 50% of my instructional time focusing on student engagement, and also I'd like to focus on my hypothesis that I would spend 15% of my time understanding specific content area standards. And also the self-assessment and reflection was at 5%. So I had 3 research questions to establish my baseline data. The first was, what do my students already believe about themselves as readers? I asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never and 5 being always, how often they are able to understand the entirety of informational and fictional texts. The blue on this graph is informational text, and the red is fictional text. So as you can see by looking at this data, no one answered 5 on this scale of always being able to understand the entirety of both fiction or nonfiction. And there is a significant change, or I guess data that shows that students have less confidence in understanding the entirety of a fictional text on average. To continue what my students believe about themselves as readers, I asked them to identify 3 of their biggest reading strengths. The first and foremost strength that most of them identified was analyzing the development of characters throughout a text. The second strength I identified was summarizing or remembering the text, and the next strength behind that is selecting an independent reading material of their own interest. On the flip side of that question, I also asked what they thought their 3 biggest reading weaknesses were, or what they would like to improve on. Most of the students identified understanding the meaning of individual words or phrases in a text, determining the central idea or theme in a text, and then there was a 5-way tie between some of those other reading standards. Key takeaways from this first research question about what my students believe about themselves is that students are not completely confident in their ability to understand fiction or nonfiction independently. On average, students are less confident in their ability to understand fiction over nonfiction, and I already talked about some of those specific reading weaknesses and strengths that they identified. My next research question was, how will I know students are impacted by the mentor text framework? My baseline data for this is the fall interim YTOP assessment for English language arts. 480 to 800 is the scale on that assessment, and as you can see, I already have 2 students that are performing at or above the proficient level. Next, how will I know my students are impacted by the mentor text framework in my classroom outside of the YTOP assessment as formative and summative assessments? I only had 2 formative assessments at the time of this data, but we have some kind of outliers here. Student 1 on his first try was not able to meet the standard for reading fiction. And then I also have some students who are already exceeding the standard at that first try. Key takeaways from this is that in the breakdown of the YTOP scores, so although not shown here, 100% of the students self-identified at least one strength that ended up being a weakness and vice versa. So that tells me that students might not have an understanding of the indicators of success within certain standards, or they might just not understand the language within a standard altogether. 2 out of 7 students are already performing at the proficient level, and 7 out of 8 students are able to meet the standard in formative assessments on the first attempt. My last baseline data question was, are my mentor texts leveled and bridged? These were kind of yes or no questions. Some indicators for success in leveling text was that each unit contains at least 1 optional reading for students or 1 leveled text based on Lexile rating. Indicators of success in bridging text is that students have engaged in discussion about higher order question that relates to topic or character, or students have already connected personally to that topic or character, probably through higher order questioning. So my action plan is to place a greater focus on the indicators of success within specific reading standards. Hattie and Clark, who are educational researchers, compiled a ton of different educational studies, thousands of them actually, and found that students who know the lesson target and what they're doing to get there have an effect size of 0.59. So for context within that textbook, anything above a 0.4 on that scale has a positive impact on learning. So students have a positive impact on their learning by understanding the standards and what they are doing to meet those. So the mentor text process is actually very versatile, and I encourage teachers of different content areas to use this within their teaching. So here are some of the perks of using it. First, you can use it to explore content area standards within any content area, to see the language within that standard, to notice some of those moves and actions that a student would need to do to be successful. Second, you can organize content-specific texts into genre, medium, or purpose and identify themes within those specific categories. Third, this process can be used to research prominent figures or historical periods. 4, you can define success within a specific skill or topic by using the musts and the mights within that mentor text framework. And 5, you can assess the validity or quality of a text using that same scale of the musts and the mights. So my priority pie has changed after establishing that baseline data. My student engagement kind of comes down to 35%, and that is because I can still use student engagement strategies to scaffold for various learning or reading abilities with different texts by leveling and bridging. Understanding the content area standards boosts up to 20 because I believe that after doing some research that students, when they understand those indicators of success, are better able to reach that success. Self-assessment boosts up to 10, and feedback via conferencing goes up to 20. Stakeholder roles. My role as a teacher, after compiling all of this research, is to make learning outcomes, course schedules, and standards visible to my students. Second, provide relevant and appropriate opportunities in which students can apply this process. 3, conference with students about their progress within the target standards. Next, the role of the student is to dissect reading standards and engage in discussion about them. So basically, the expectation is that they're participating and that they are producing. Second, using that mentor text process as a means to demonstrate their understanding of those reading skills. So breaking down those standards using that mentor text process. And 3, practicing revision over failure. No grade is set in stone. They can go back and they can revise to make sure that they are meeting that standard. Lastly, the role of staff in this process is to first provide me with feedback about the mentor text process via the PLC framework that we already have in the school. Second, use consistent language and mentor text process throughout the English department specifically. It's important that we have common assessments in common language. 3, analyze data from a non-biased perspective. Time frame for completing those stakeholder roles. I will front load my learning outcomes at the beginning of each quarter, and within that quarter, each individual week. So the tasks and the goals that we have. Second, I will constantly search for leveled texts and brain-based learning strategies to help leverage student interest. 3, I'll conference with students every Thursday. This comes naturally as we already have a grade check integrated with every Thursday. Time frame for students, a weekly discussion about standards and success criteria, daily use of that mentor text process and vocabulary, practicing revision over failure always. And lastly, the time frame for staff to complete responsibilities. Feedback via the PLC process twice a year. That happens naturally. Second, meeting to create common assessments in language bi-weekly in the English PLC specifically. And third, analyzing data from a non-biased perspective as needed. And I will bring this research to them to get feedback. So the outcomes and benefits of including mentor text framework throughout the different content areas are: first, understanding success in the content area standards has a positive impact on learning. Second, using common language throughout a school provides consistency in academic success. Third, providing opportunities for students to share their cultural lens creates a diverse and rich learning community. Within this study that has been cited, there was some really interesting data that talked about the power of mentor texts in communities of color and providing relevant PSAs and community building opportunities and events that helped build a sense of identity for students and community members within that community of color. And fourth, reinforcing thinking strategies over content knowledge really empowers English language learners to succeed in all content areas. So this, again, it just kind of shows us that thinking strategies can bleed over into content areas. And so English language learners can focus a little bit more on what a text means, and they can spend more time analyzing a text when it is broken down into these smaller steps, and then they can focus on that fluency later once they understand what's expected of them. If there are any questions about the mentor text process and kind of the benefits about content areas, feel free to reach out. Thank you.